Hello everybody, my name is Joaquin Revello, and I am part of the Canadian delegation for the World Scholars Cup. This video, I'm going to be talking about the first of 3 parts of the history curriculum for the World Scholars Cup. Let's do this. Before I get into it, if you find this video helpful, please share it with your team and friends and other people you may know who will also benefit from learning the history curriculum. So if you look at the curriculum, I know what you're thinking, and it's probably what I thought when I first saw it, and it was the question of, why is the curriculum so long this year, right? Was that what you're thinking? Well, the topic this year is on neglected history, which is history that has been thrown away and not taught because of bad things people might have done in the past. So when we talk about history, we're normally talking about written evidence and proof that things actually happened. Artifacts is not really part of history, as most historians classify that as prehistory, which is the world before written records were introduced. This all comes down to histography, which is the study of historical writings, which help historians come up with what they think of history as what happened before today. So when we talk about neglected history, we're talking about parts of history that are left out and not talked about at all. So if you go over to the Scholars Cup subjects website and go over there to the history, there are tons of subjective questions that I strongly recommend you answer with your team. First up on the curriculum for history is invisible children. A few articles that you should read through is the article on a history of teenagers, which is found on the World Scholars Cup, summing up the book Centuries of Children by Philippe Eyre. He really argues that until the 15th, 16th, or even 17th century, the idea of children was not really invented. Instead, children were treated as little adult in their own respect. Basically, there were no mom or dad connections because children would mostly die early on for them to have a very intimate connection. Aries also claims that children were often like servants to the adults. Next up, I want to quickly talk about the idea of teenagers. So teenagers were invented by the US in 1920. The main reason was because of the widespread of schools available to people after the First World War. This widespread of public schools helped teenagers do what they are best at doing, and that is screwing around. It was also because of science discovering the age that we go through puberty, which makes teenagers go all crazy for wanting each other. And hey, I'm not calling myself out on this, right? Also the fact that there were a whole bunch of angry men yelling at kids walking on their lawns. Teenagers became more of a name of just a bunch of kids going through puberty who would screw around type of thing. Next up is a short glimpse of children's lives in many different places at many different times in the world. First up is children in Egypt who, until the age of 5, had no responsibility and were even cherished by the people in the community. And by the age of 12, the daughters were married off to slightly older men. Yeah. Lovely. So in medieval Europe, the first year of a child's born, around 50% of the children would die. That's the same as flipping a coin. Let's see. Heads would be death, tails would be surviving. When you look at that, heads, you died. May I also say that most of the children were uneducated, poor, and they would also drink diluted wine between the ages of 5 and 14. In colonial America, babies ages 6 months and above would wear a long dress. That way it would be hard for them to actually crawl, and they'd learn to walk faster because they thought that if you crawled, you were for some reason an animal. The children would also wear a helmet. That way they wouldn't fall and break their heads into pudding when learning to walk when they were 1 year old. On top of that, children would often be led by ropes That way they could learn to walk faster. During the dinner table, they would not be talked to at all. They'd only be seen, such as the famous expression came from that children should be heard, not seen. And they would also be fed by going behind the parents and like feeding a dog at dinner time, basically. The boys would go to school and the girls would learn to do training and the housework when they got slightly older. In 19th century Europe, children lived very differently depending on whether you were wealthy or poor. The rich would live with a nanny that would tell them everything they have to know about sticking with their routine, while the poor would not have the luxuries to play around with a good toy, basically. Oh yeah, and piano. Not to mention the fact that parents would end up with upwards of 10 to 12 children that would basically provide them income once they grew older by working out in the streets and then paying their parents. Next up is Dynastic China, which is China in the year basically 1000 BC all the way up to 200 BCE. Childhood lasted until age 8, where boys would take a different path than girls. This is often seen in most ancient civilizations, where the girls go off and do their housework and take care of babies, while the boys would go off and learn a whole bunch of academics and maybe even join the army. In this case, the boys would learn everything necessary based on Confucianism to take a civil state exam once they grew older, while the lower caste peasants would just stay as peasants. As you might expect, girls would go and learn from other women on how to do house chores such as knitting, and the elite girls would go on and learn writing and calligraphy. In the Kong, located in Botswana, Angola, and Namibia, genders didn't really play a role that much in society. Men would normally go hunting as they are seen stronger, but women can also go and help them hunt if they want to. When it comes down to kids, there are normally 3 to 5 kids born apart. Once the mother has the next child, the previous child stops being cared for and nursed for. However, they still stay in the family. Deep in the Amazon rainforest live the Yanomami people, which consist of a tribe of 35,000 people. This group is currently isolated in the rainforest. However, some tribes have been photographed. Girls help their mother from a young age, and by age 10, she will actually be running her own house. By age 12, she is probably getting married, and then the teens don't get married until they're much older. In Sparta, it was a hard knock life for these kids.
This is Sparta!
Basically, once you were born, they would test you by throwing you in a bucket of wine and then seeing how you would react. And if they did not like you, they would leave you out to die in the forest to see if you would survive, or they would send you to be a slave based on whatever they wanted. And if they did like you, by the age of 7, you would go to military camp where you would start training to become a soldier. May I say that only boys were sent to military camp, and it was just a terrible experience. They would get beat up, they would fight every day, there would be like street fights. It was the older boys would actually start beating down the little kids to make them stronger. There would also be sleep deprivation and food shortages, as well as a whole bunch of angry people removing all their anger on these little kids. The first schools were developed in Babylonian, Egypt, and then Greece. The main goal was to teach boys how to write. In China, there were various schools spread all around the capital which taught the 6 arts: rites, music, archery, calligraphy, charioteering, mathematics. So I was doing some research online to find out when governments first started offering free school systems, also known as compulsory schooling. The earliest I could find was a school in the United Kingdom, which started in the year 1440, based on a charity, and would offer free education to 70 boys. And then in New England around the year 1635. In New England, if you paid your taxes and were unfortunately a white boy, this school was free. Of course, in the last few decades, it's almost common in countries around the world to offer free education, such as in Russia, where you can get free education if you win in a bunch of school competitions, and in Canada and India in the 2000s, where if you pay your taxes, you can have free public schools. To remove a large chunk of poverty, families actually who earn less than 50 grand a year are given free tuition to universities here in Canada, as well as the fact that education is completely free in Finland, Norway, and Germany. The first boarding school emerged in the UK in the year 597 and served as a school to help boys become priests. The next boarding school that was actually free was the one I talked about before, that was created in the UK in the year 1440 and offered free education to 70 boys. But school kind of sucked back then, as you had to wake up at 5 in the morning and then go all the way through school to 8 at night, where you would go directly to bed without anything else to do. Oh, also extra co-curriculars began in the United States in the 19th century and served more as an extension to school, offering more activities. Before I move on, I'm going to take a little break, as this video is huge. If you haven't done so already, please share it with your friends and your teammates so you can start learning the history curricula a lot quicker.
A potato flew around my...
So now a brief history of orphanages. So the first orphanage formed in Rome in around the year 400 AD, and in medieval Europe, the orphanages were taken care of by the church. Orphanages were then set up in America in the 19th century and would start scaling up their popularity internationally from there. Next up is something called rites of passage, which basically signify the coming of age or the growing up or the transitional periods people experience in their life. The most famous one being weddings. The first up being Guan, which is from Star Trek and serves basically as a survival test for all teenage Vulcans. And let me just tell you, Daniel Berdichevsky loves Star Trek, so it's no mystery that this is in the curriculum this year. Basically, these Vulcans survive on their own without food, water, or weapons. Instead, they have to find and make their own food and weapons. Sweet 16 is a party basically girls have here in the United States and Canada to celebrate their 16th birthday. Guess who's turning 16? Me. Yeah, I turned 16. Next up is something called Krypteia, which is basically when a whole bunch of Spartan men wanted to prove themselves to become the next Spartan leader. It's quite unknown what they did, but it's kind of thought that they would start terrorizing people and becoming like the local angry policemen, basically just to prove that they were the strongest leader out there. Quinceaneara is when a girl turns 15-year-old in Latin America. It shows that a woman is strong and capable of making her own decisions in life. Celebrated mostly in Mexico, but in also countries as well, such as Colombia, Brazil, and Argentina. Next up is Guan and Ji, which is when Chinese men, Guan and Chinese women, Ji would be given their official Chinese name at the age of 20. This is rarely practiced in the modern world, as it is a Chinese traditional practice. The next one is Seijin Shiki, which is the coming of age day for adults in Korea and Japan. The main purpose is to celebrate adulthood and congratulate people for making it this far in life. Congratulations, adults. Chudakarana is when a child gets their first haircut in Hindi. While in Native America, young males celebrated adulthoods by doing a whole bunch of ceremonies called vision quests. The main reason why it's called a vision quest is because this young boy is left out in nature to go pray to the spirits and find out what his purpose in life is by getting something called a vision. Okuyi is a ritual that happens both in weddings, ceremonies, and occasionally when a child turns 4 years old, that is celebrated in Africa. The leader would wear this traditional costume to celebrate. Bat Mitzvah or Bat Mitzvah is when a 12 13-year-old girl or a 12-year-old or a 13-year-old boy becomes a full member of the Jewish community. He is allowed to participate in all aspects of the religion and is celebrated by having a few parties. A teenager turns 13, he gets something called a car. And this celebration is often referred to as his first car, where he's now an adult and he's able to drive around. Finally, in Aboriginal Australian society, young boys ages 11 to 16, when transitioning over to an adult, they would do something that's called a walkabout, where they would go to the middle of the forest and survive a few months. This would show them transitioning from teenager to adult, and is not something I would particularly be excited about doing. If you found this video helpful, please share it with your friends, teammates, and Scholars Cup group. Next episode of History for WSC, I will be tackling those who serve. So please subscribe down below, that way you can be notified and get the studying over so you can get good scores in your Scholars Cup competition. If you found this video helpful, please like below. And until next time, stay productive. See you guys later.